Good evening, my local drones. This is Bio Gundam here, and I'm back again for another video. So today's video, we're going to be doing a discussion video on the show Argento Soma. And to help me here, I have my lovely guests. We have Lonecrit, Kaiser, and Zeph. So introduce yourselves.
Okay, so the buzz gotta go first, I guess. Anyways, yeah, I'm young Kaiser. You know, I've been on Bio's channel before. You probably know me as like the Raven, the chick who rants about My Hero Academia and such, and yeah, oh, and also about, Irresponsible Captain Tyler, huge underrated show. And we're gonna talk about another underrated classic, honestly. So, there's that.
I'm Zeph. I like Argento Soma, and I think I don't think it has the same kind of credibility or staying power as something like Captain Tyler, which does have some kind of acclaim. It's pretty much just been passed up and forgotten about by most people. And it's a shame because it pulls far more from other elements than I would say most anime that are very insulated and incestuous in how it's made. And it'd be nice to talk about it.
Oh man! All right, before anyone else says, I've watched it fairly recently, about like a month or two or so by this recording in the year of our Lord 2020, right? And yeah, like Zeb's just said, I think it's pretty good.
I'm Lonecrit. I'm sure dedicated viewers of Bio Gundam already know me. I'm Bio Gundam's script editor for some of his videos, as well as his reviews, and the guy who does his thumbnails and quite a few of his video titles. And I've also been on quite a few videos with him doing discussions in the past. And also, just to say my piece on Argento Soma briefly, it's good, it's very good, and I'll try my best to share it with more people.
Yeah, so today's topic is going to be Argento Soma, a show that I think we can all agree is underappreciated and underwatched.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
And I think we're here to talk about why people should watch it and what makes it so good. So Argento Soma, in brief, is about basically aliens who are coming to Earth. No one knows why they're around, and a professor has basically made this alien out of dead alien parts and stuff. He tries to revive it from the dead. Comes back to life.
Let's see that we have our main. Oh right, we also have our main character, Takuto Kaneshiro.
Yeah, who gets involved in this experiment and loses his, I think, girlfriend or fiance or something.
Girlfriend, yes.
Yeah, girlfriend. Loses his girlfriend when the alien known as codenamed Frank, or gets Frank. Wakes up from his slumber and basically destroys the lab and shit, and then starts this quest for vengeance, and Frank fighting aliens and military and government politicking and all sorts of stuff. Anything else I missed? Or should
both? Well, kind of, but both Takuto and the alien Frank, who was basically the patchwork of parts of the other aliens that the military have been fighting, have been put in basically this special task force specifically geared towards, fighting the aliens directly and keeping them from a spot that all of the aliens are trying to congregate to on Earth called Paradise Point. No one knows why they're there. No one knows what, where did they come from and where are they going, but they basically find them so that they'll keep them as far as away from that place as possible. And there's also a girl named Harriet who has some sort of special bond with Frank, which gets explained later, and she also has PTSD about parents who died from alien attacks, and that's about it.
Excuse me, I do feel the need to mention, though, the organization, which, by the way, was called Morgue, they didn't actually make the alien. They received it. They either dug it up or it crash-landed somewhere or something, and they only augmented it with bits of other aliens. Originally it was just one thing, which comes into play later on.
It's probably good to preface the entire thing to say that Argento Soma is primarily subtext and literal text is tertiary. If you try to interpret it as what you see at face value, you would lose a majority of what the show is about. The actual aliens themselves, when you find out about the reveal later on, that's what ties back into the whole alien thing. And the entire thing is basically a leitmotif or allegory of Frankenstein's monster. That's why it's called, quote-unquote, Frank. He was in a lab. You character is disfigured and he mirrors the thing that he's creating his scapegoat out of. So if anyone wants to watch the series, keep in mind that the symbolism of certain scenes, the motifs of certain scenes, are probably more prevalent or probably more important than what's literally happening on screen.
Yeah, there's very clear there's very clear thematic subtext throughout the story that is very apparent, especially pretty early on, I feel like, anyways. Oh, but before we go on to this, we're gonna be going like all in on spoilers, I feel like, because how can we have a discussion about this if not? So if you haven't seen the show, you're watching this video, what the fuck are you doing? Go watch it. It's actually pretty good. Speaking of that, really funny story. Yeah, it's really, really good, even for its time.
Great, even.
And the funny thing was, here's the thing. I always heard about it since my early days as, getting into anime and stuff. But everybody keeps on kind of telling me that it's like, I don't know, like a 6 out of 10. But this shit is, honestly, it's like a good 7 to a light 8, I feel like. Honestly,
yeah, I would agree.
I agree with that.
I would agree. Like at the beginning, it's like slightly underwhelming, but once you sort of like get into it and understand what the show is about, like especially like the twist with the aliens, you're like, like it's like a light bulb moment of that's the show, and
yeah, okay. Oh.
Well, I wouldn't say I found it underwhelming in the beginning. It very, very clearly builds and builds. Like, it throws you the bomb that is the first episode, and then just slowly escalates things with the characters going forward, until then you get your next mini bomb in the end of episode 6, and then it just keeps on, like, building the characters and the themes of the series, particularly through the character of Harriet, only for, like, everything to finally come to a climax at the end. So, I wouldn't really say it's underwhelming or lags. It's clearly doing a thing.
Well,
yeah, especially in regards to my case.
None of it's underwhelming if you actually watch enough film, because it takes far more from cinematic language than it does anime, which is more erratic, has fast edits, doesn't understand subtlety.
I would say doesn't understand it, but greatly foregoes it. Yeah,
that's why I said it was more heavily influenced from things outside of the anime medium than the anime medium itself. The thing is, like, it's methodical, but it does not mean it's boring. Boring is the wrong term to describe it. It's methodical, right? It's the difference between watching Argento Soma is the difference between watching Star Wars and watching 2001: A Space Odyssey. Both science fiction. One is far more streamlined and commercial based. The other one is far more cerebral, thinking man's kind of show. That is basically Argento Soma. It is the difference between deciding to watch high fantasy or science fiction. Hard science fiction.
In fact, one thing I gotta note is that, honestly, I didn't really feel like, that even from the first episode, that, like Lonecrit said, because it was such a huge bomb. What caught me from, like, the very first part of the show wasn't the aliens and stuff, but it was that short clip, or that short voice clip, anyways, about, the main character Takuto kind of in his room about, his girlfriend Maki, and about this whole situation going down with him apparently cheating on her. And, like, there's this word called, like, written word, liar, written on, like, a floor or, like, the sand or something like that. We see her, like, standing outside his apartment or whatever. And we never see, like, the full context until later in the show. But I feel like from there, because that's a sort of conflict that barely happens in regards to a main character in a show like this before. And I was interested to see what was going with that. And as the episode kept on going, with the stuff about about his former life in like basically a science college, and his views about what's going on with the war against the aliens and stuff like that going on in the episode, it really allows us to have a good idea of who Takuto is as a person, and maybe made a clear distinction that he might be the protagonist, but he might have his own sorts of hang-ups and stuff like that. especially in regards to him like ruining about memories of her girlfriend, of his girlfriend, and like him always saying this phrase that, hey, there we go again, not saying anything. Because she's a soft-spoken girl most of the time, and she doesn't like speak her mind, which is probably why he cheated on her in the first place. And, giving you all these bits and pieces.
And that's like one of the things I like about Argento Soma is that it's very much like show don't tell. Like, it's not telling you that he's cheating on his girlfriend. You can just tell that. It's show, like, because of all the symbolism and how the scenes are done.
It's not just about like the cheating on him. It's just that everything that kind of that it's the subtext of what would drive him to do something like that, which again is rarely seen a lot in anime. And
it does straight up reveal that later on anyway.
He has hang-ups. He's a narcissist. He's an intellectual narcissist. He's also misanthropic. He's a person that is fully aware that most of the people around him are not thinking on the same level that he is. This is also reinforced by the fact that he is attending a military academy and he has some kind of engineering background. Everything that the film, the anime does reinforces the fact that this is who he is as a person. It also reinforces the fact that he's not much of a good protagonist. He's more so just a character that's transitioning from being a teenager to a young adult. And as such, you go from being someone that lashes out externally at things, blaming the world for your issues, to someone that accepts the fact that you have to have responsibility for some of your issues. And that's basically the metamorphosis that we see the character go through. So, yes, the cheating thing basically just sets that in stone immediately. The fact that he's in college sets the fact that he's intellectual immediately. And
that too as well.
Him basically treating her like she's the problem. Like, he's basically treating everything else like it's a problem, because being a narcissist requires to be that. Like, you cannot have humility if you want to be a narcissist, right? So
it also contributes to some, and that also like diametrically like sort of what was I about to say? Yeah, it kind of coincides with the whole thing with the aliens, because we as we go further into the show, we understand that in regards to like the humans in the military, they have no idea, who the characters are, and who the aliens are, and what they're doing. But I'm gonna let somebody else talk, because that's a whole other thing.
That again plays into
what I was gonna say is that what really hooked me early on during the set, the emotional, where like firstly we get the whole in episode 1 where Takuto around her dying at her, despite the fact that he seems only to like. Well, the way he reacts to at the ending of episode 1, where he realizes he's done a thing that he can never take back about him, and so the way he projects that outwards on Frank, the fact that in his heart he knows it, as we learn more of later in the show. That idea of not being able to take back your sins, only being able to move forward. And so, in that, we've got the emotional stake set up. Soma feeling guilty for what he did, blaming somebody else for building and moving forward with that.
Yeah, and I find it fascinating that, like, most of the problems of the show, it's all about fucking projection, from Soma's issues with Frank to humanity and the aliens. It's all, it's all projection. It's this perceived threat. It's this perceived, it's his fault, not mine. Oh, he did this, then it's his fault, and yada yada. Like, I think that's one of the cool things about Argento Soma, is that a lot of these characters' issues, like Zeph said, a lot of these guys are teenagers, they lash out, they blame other people, and it's all about projection. Like, it's this drill sergeant's fault that I can't get in the military. Oh, it's my father's fault, or it's this and that, And
again, that's just reinforcing the fact that he's growing up. You go from externally blaming people to actually accepting responsibility. The difference between a teenager that says the world is against me an adult that says, no, I have to be accountable. And going back to the whole thing about the actual aliens, this is why I said subtext is primary here in this show, because the aliens represent basically the detachment from other people, not understanding other people, and I don't know how much are we allowed to spoil in the actual show?
Go ahead.
All of it.
Go ahead.
Right. So when we find out later on that the alien itself, not really an alien, but actually a far more developed human, another evolution of humanity itself. So like the prologue scene to 2001: A Space Odyssey, when the person transcended to another dimension and basically became like a fifth dimensional being. That's basically what's being implied here, that even though all the characters see what looks like a droning, thoughtless monster that's heading towards one area, and it doesn't seem like it's capable of any kind of intellectual conversation with them, in reality, they were the ones that were being the quote-unquote Neanderthals in this situation, and the thing that they were fighting against is far more developed than them, to the point where their existence does not matter. So
it's not even just that. It's literally
a character-based story. You go from a character-based story for the first half to a narrative-based story in the second half. Also, on a meta-narrative sense, it's also showing that no matter how much we want to internalize our issues and conflate the value of it, at the end of the day, when something of greater significance is presented in front of us, something of greater magnitude, it seizes that moment from us. So we have a character that's so self-obsessed. He's always self-sabotaging himself and people around him because he's trying to blame the world for his issues. And when we find out more about Frank and what Frank represents, we realize that, okay, this is actually something bigger than us. All of a sudden, all those characters have to take a backseat because their issues are now trivial in comparison to the gravitas of things that's so big.
Yeah, and I think one scene that really highlights this, along with many others, is like the military meeting where they're going all about the aliens. Like, oh, the aliens are going to Paradise Point. Why are they going here? And the military is like, oh, they must be rendezvousing here for some sort of invasion. They must be invading us. And the politicians are like, oh, you military people, all you're concerned about war and it's spending money and yada yada. And
I just say that whole entire scene, just one phrase that encapsulates that entire scene is just okay, boomer. It's just a bunch of fucking boomers just yelling at each other.
Yeah, but it's more than that, though. It's really interesting how it sort of reflects the themes of the show, as it's implied through the way that the themes are expressed through all the other characters, of this, very same idea of projecting your issues with yourself on other things to avoid progress by self-sabotaging and regression. Just like Takuto Kaneshiro, Ryu Soma, refuses to accept his own sins and only pushes the blame for that onto people around him, so too does humanity project their problems with themselves with refusing to accept their own sins in regard to Yuri Leonov, Frank's actual name, refuse to turn the finger in on themselves and instead point it outward to Frank and all his other projections, treating them as a hostile force.
And I think
all the aliens are basically one guy. In fact, that's kind of what made ever since watching it, so I pretty much made Frank himself
it's not
one of my new favorite characters.
Actual one guy.
Basically
Frank,
one guy.
The actual invading force, it's actually one guy. It's not kind of. It's that's what the whole point of being a fifth dimensional being is. You're no longer bound to space-time or time-space. He's basically like the human equivalent to a tesseract at this point, right? The tesseract does not is not confounded by those base dimensions. That's what they're trying to get at here. It's basically humans are the equivalent to a 2D character, and they're trying to comprehend a sphere. But because you're a 2D character, the only thing you can comprehend is a circle. So they're only seeing a fraction of the actual picture. That's what they're trying to get at with Frank. So when you have these multiple variations of the same person, it's basically saying, hey, even though you think I'm this savage thing, I'm actually just way more ahead of all of you guys. And this ties back to the fact that the show is not literal, it's metaphysical. It's not trying to take everything literally. It's a metaphysical show, so the actual themes itself play into that.
Yeah, and then there's like a scene, I think a couple of episodes later, or like before the end, where they find out that Frank can talk, and the military brass are like, "Oh fuck! Like we have to keep this lie going of that we've got this alien invasion. Like we have to keep this lie going because otherwise we could lose our jobs or the public will strike back at us."
Not even just that. It's just that like so many lives have been lost because of the aliens that have been dropping down, and whether they mean to or not, they have caused a lot of damage to the earth, and a lot of people have so much hatred towards them. So what would happen if you just tell them to stop fighting because they're like, oh, they got feelings too?
It also
like,
this idea of like option between admitting one's sins and moving forward that we get into the rest of the show, as Frank being sentient is that been treating him the way they've been using him as a tool, kind of fuck, and so it is naturally threatening to them, just like every organization in the show. Being with the manifestations of their mistakes, them.
We're kind of repeating the same point.
Yes, we're speaking with. So, let's get down to brass tacks. So, first thing we gotta start is let's talk about the other cast, right? Because we just mostly been talking about Takuto and Frank the whole time.
Yeah, we need to. Yeah, let's talk about the other characters. So, what's your thoughts on the British guy? What was his name? Fuck, I just watched the show. I keep on forgetting his name. But
Simmons, Simmons.
Simmons.
The guy who's voiced by Crispin Freeman.
So most of the other characters that are part of the paramilitary group, Funeral, they've all gathered there with their own agenda in mind, their own motivations, their own quote-unquote demons, right? And this is just reinforced with all of the individual episodes that are dedicated to them. You can see why they are in this place, this funeral, this death march, essentially. So you have the blonde character, right? He's trying to relinquish himself from having to depend on a family that has everything already. This is why he's upset with Ryu Soma, which is he knows Takuto by experience. He's upset by the fact that this person operates with reckless abandon, doesn't really have an appreciation for what he already has, and because this guy has already given up so much, they are immediately combative with each other, right? And that's why they both got sent to a military stand-down. You have characters like the actual captain of the team with the short hair,
Commander Ness.
She's a businesswoman by day and night, right? She's a workwoman. She dedicated her whole life to this, and this has become like her family. And with Hattie being introduced, it became a second chance to become a mother instead of just a military woman. You have the girl with the red hair who is dying, that we find out later she's dying, and she's here because she knows she's on a time limit, and she doesn't quite care anymore, and that's why she's drawn to Ryo Soma, because they both have that same sense of recklessness about their act, and that's what brought them together. She would much rather go out in a blaze of glory with someone by her side, even if it comes at his detriment, than to just go out in a whimper. And all of these characters are basically just people trying to cope and finding some kind of outlet to do so. Again, reinforcing the whole theme of projecting your issues.
I also like the character Hattie as well. I think she's very fascinating as well. Especially her connection with Frank and stuff, and how she's almost like a child. And unlike
what do you mean almost? She's a child. She's
what I was about to say. What the fuck?
And acts like she's
Okay, well,
she's a 12-year-old who acts like she's 6.
Well, aside from the fact that she's a literal child, she's also there to represent the loss of innocence for everybody else, because she is the only thing that's close to not being pessimistic in this world, right? She's the only idealistic person in a world where everyone is cynical and detached from
realistic
other people. Yeah, everyone's realistic about their situation. She still sees everything in rainbow.
Yeah, I mean, she talks about going to the land of the fairies, and she makes like a flower ring for Frank when she's getting like kidnapped by social services.
Yeah, you may want to mention that from her perspective, this essentially means some kind of promised land where everything's gonna be hunky-dory and everybody's gonna be happy.
Yeah, and her life is... And her life is kind of anything but happy. Like, yeah, she has her new family at funeral and shit, but
if you remember the scene where she was introduced and you saw the trauma that she witnessed, she's basically... It's implied that she's socially stunted because of that, right? Like, her emotional development and the psychological development has been stunted because of the arrival of the aliens. Which
I think they had. I think they implied at one point that she had either amnesia or
no, she actually quite literally has brain damage. She has a piece of alien tech thing in her brain. She has like shrapnel in her brain. So it's like it not only is it implied that there's PTSD there from the actual first arrival of the aliens, she also literally have brain damage, and figuratively she acts like that as well. That's the entire implication. She's basically childlike in a world of cynicism.
In fact, the interesting thing about Hattie herself that I kind of find pretty fascinating is that, like, on the baseline level, she would be the kind of character in the show that would be incredibly unlikable most of the time.
Well, I mean, she was,
because she's a young child. She always goes on about all this stuff about, fairies in the promised land and all this stuff. But what the show does very smartly from, like, the very beginning is that, it makes it clear that her trauma and the things that she went through are put in, like, center focus for the most part. And that it doesn't necessarily, it basically gives context and adds a sort of tragic factor to her desperately trying to keep her innocence.
I think
it's not just that.
It should be mentioned that she has a symbiotic relationship with the actual alien. There's a mutual psychosis that they both share, and beyond that, it doesn't really matter how you feel about her. It's more what she represents. She's there to basically help highlight other characters' traits. So she's there to be a daughter to a mother that lost a chance to become one. She's there for Ryu Soma to through his toxicity
project his girlfriend.
She's there to basically provide some kind of be like a cheerleader for these other people in there. Like, her inclusion is more so in benefit of everyone else than it is of her. She is a MacGuffin, essentially. She's a living MacGuffin that has more context to it. So she's not just annoy you or anything.
I'm just saying that they did that way better.
It's also interesting how, by virtue of her presence and, as it was mentioned previously, her representation of lost innocence, she also goes to break the monotony of the cynicism and realism of the show by highlighting what the rest of the characters do. Not just like what they see, but also what they want. And in doing so manages to humanize the rest of them. More so, than they already were anyway, because even without her, we're doing pretty well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would even put that much weight on Hattie. I don't think she's only there. She's a really well-written prop, but she's not center focused. She's not that important when compared to everyone else as far as what they represent in the show. She's just there as a conduit for other things to happen.
Yeah,
and as far as the conduit is concerned,
as a character development device.
No.
She's a positively static character, while most of the other characters in the show are dynamic due to her influence.
Yes.
Deal.
The best of which, of course, is Ryu Soma, because the show is dedicated to him.
He's the main dude. That's his deal.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
It also kind of, in a very loose sense, Argento Soma reminds me of Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas as well, in the sense where it takes a character that would typically be seen as a villain or just as strongly unlikable, but humanized so much through his treatment that despite the fact that the man is like an abusive boyfriend, a traitor, borderline villain, you still get to see him like as a human being. Through all the dimensions that are added to him, not only in regard to his self-hatred, his projection, but also his relationships again with people like Hattie and his girlfriend Maki.
Worth mentioning, like, you need to bring up the cinematography. Well, the camera trick they use, the cinematic language they use, right? And when I say like cinematic language, I mean in the way it communicates information. So when we first find out about the captain of the group and why she is the way she is, it was shown with a simple cutscene, a bent rail, flowers in hand, and we already understand what is being implied. And then when you cut back, and you juxtapose that scene with Hattie at the edge of the facility, and she's reaching out to her, it's her second chance. The film does. Oh God, I keep saying film. The TV series does it a lot, where it uses cinematic language to tell its story. So you have another scene, for example, with the girl with the red hair, and she's attached to Ryo Soma.
Guinevere, yeah.
And you just have to see the hospital scene, and you understand what's being implied here. Why she's been this reckless as him. Like why is she willing to be his Bonnie for his Clyde, right? And a lot of the show does this. It does things by the facial expressions, how a certain character will look at each other, their body posture, the physicality of some people. Nothing is ever blurted out through expository dialogue. Everything is just learned from body language, from posture, from framing, from blocking, everything. So this is why it's far different than most anime, because it doesn't try to use the shorthand that a lot of anime uses. And what I mean by anime shorthand, I mean things like, stereotypical archetypes.
The flashback.
Like a tsundere, a kundere, like characters that are pre-written and pre-molded, or whenever you have certain things that anime does, and you quite literally know what it is because you've seen it 100 times over, right? And that's why I said anime is incestuous, and this one stands out in the fact that it doesn't fall into the same trope. So even though it's...
Yeah, in fact, Ryoma himself, in like most cases, like, he would more likely be seen by other people as just like, oh, this edgy boy, anti-hero archetype. But like,
so even though it
obviously
has the aesthetic sensibilities of a post-Eva work, it doesn't function in the same way a post-Eva work does. Unlike other shows that came after Eva that still functions within the same frame of anime, right? So Eureka 7 is undoubtedly an anime. It has all of the anime tropes in there. It has the girl that the protagonist is chasing after. It has the big bad with quite literal black ship armadas coming in. It doesn't have that here. Those things are missing here. This is Eva, but for young adults, essentially.
It's a lot more mature take. And also, talking about, like, freaking Soma, like, his character design, damn, does it look cool.
Yes, super cool. Before we trail off any further, it's worth mentioning, because I think it's really important that you bring up, like, the time when something came out, because it kind of puts things into focus.
Perspective.
The anime community in general, right? One of the biggest issues that they have is separating inspiration or being inspired by something, having a homage to something, and being a ripoff of something. They're not one and the same. They're not always the same, right? Like, yes, you will have a title that will create like a shift in a genre, and everything will proceed to follow in that footstep. Does not necessarily mean that doing so make that an inferior work. A lot of the backlash that this got, and I guess like other series, or other shows that borrow a lot from the aesthetic sensibilities of Eva, like Razafon.
Razafon, Jesus.
Right. There's a lot of shows that are lambasted because it basically borrows those elements when it's unfairly treated as such. There's a difference between how brain-powered borrows something and how a show that actually has something to say borrows something.
Oh my god, brain-powered, holy shit.
I actually haven't finished that yet.
To say. Well, you don't need to, unless you want to lose, brain power. But,
he's not joking, like, this show is shit.
Argento Soma
is
unfairly lampooned because of that, because of the fact that people can't just discern the difference between such. And I would say this is actually a direct commentary on Eva, and that actually challenges the ideas that Eva poses, and builds to a more realistic approach to it. I know it's kind of like blasphemous to say, but it does. Like you have a show that let's be honest here, Eva has flourishing. It has, it doesn't, the actual theological symbolism does not mean anything. Like all that theology stuff does not matter if you actually understand the biblical annotation being pulled from there.
Saying that the creators admitted themselves.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally flavoring and garnish.
Right. You go from something that treats it like window dressing to something that actually treats it as a thematic element, right? So even though this pulls from the Frankenstein monster book, you quite literally have, and figuratively have a character that reflects those traits, right? I believe Lonecrit noticed this on his viewing of Ryu Soma.
Are you going to talk about the fact that
when he has moments where he is no longer angsting out, or he's no longer putting up his front, right? Putting up like his wall protection from the.
Oh yeah, the way his face will change a bit in regards.
Yeah, he's just geeking out about science and stuff.
Yeah. I was going to mention this earlier.
The part of him that's
I was going to mention this earlier as well.
Can I say the line out of my mouth? The part of him that's not disfigured behind his hairstyle is revealed, showing that he has a bit of humanity. Whenever he switches that back off and he becomes misanthropic again and he becomes a complete nihilist again, you get the ugly disfigured face, right? So you have literal and figurative elements there. He's literally discarded. Figuratively, it's reflected in his actions. So it's not just window dressing here; it actually is thematically relevant.
Has everyone here talked about everything they want to talk about the show? Because I think we should wrap this up soon.
One more thing.
All right.
One more thing. It's really cool that this show actually has consequences for people's actions. A lot of anime, a good example would be, look at the Gundam franchise. Big ship explode, Char Aznavour comes in as a red comet, he destroys an entire platoon. Next episode, everyone's fine, your mech is fine, we're gonna fight again, let's pretend nothing just went wrong. Aside from like 79 Gundam and maybe Thunderbolt and 8th MS Team, you hardly ever get you hardly ever get anything from those main franchises that actually deal with concurrent consequences for actions, right? There's a cause and effect.
Yeah, that's
a lot of anime.
They kind of has that.
Here, you have a character, Ryu Soma, who is spying, right? He's essentially committing treason to this group, and at the end of the show, he faces the consequences of it. He is actually jailed for a couple of years, right?
Yep.
Or you have the character like the redhead, who basically lashes out and she basically just goes out in a blaze of glory. There is no mystery power that's going to be ascended from above from the alien to save her life. No, she's dead by the end. If you set up something like a terminal illness, pay that off. If you set up something like someone committing treason, pay that off. And that's what this show does continuously. So it's great to see something that actually treats consequences with weight instead of just retconning it by the end of the third episode, completely forgetting what it pre-establishes.
If I'm free to say something, I guess because pretty much everything else about the show is pretty great. I guess one thing that I could say kind of knock against it, I guess, is that like the fights in the show, like they're structured well. The strategies that the characters use are pretty sound. In fact, I love the fact that, not all the time, it's not just like, hey, we bring in Frank and everything's cool. Like, no, everybody kind of contributes to the whole shebang when defending against these aliens and stuff. One thing I guess you can knock against it is that while the direction in the fights are good, it's not like they're like the most, I guess there can be like the animation itself isn't all that stellar in those cases. Like there's a good amount of like restock footage and stuff, especially in regards to like Frank's punches and stuff. And I guess you could say that like the mech designs are mostly pretty unimpressive given the time frame anyways. But,
I wouldn't say the mech designs are unimpressive. I would say that yes, there is limitations on what they do animate, what they do inside the show. But to its credit, though, with those limitations, it tries its best to make it as cinematic as it possibly can. It doesn't let those limitations prevent it from actually having impactful moments. So even though the character model, for example, may not be animated, it would still frame it in a way that it still delivers upon whatever it's trying to deliver upon, right? right? So you have a scene with the aliens, for example, when we first find out like the ship that they were flying are actually a part of those aliens, and I believe there was they had a still shot, and they basically just dragged the actual the composite of the image and just kind of dragged across the screen. But the way that they actually framed it, it still delivered upon that impact. Like, wow, this is actually a huge reveal. The way the music will swell up at that scene, for example, like a grand crescendo, it still gives you the immediacy of the situation, of the gravity of that situation.
It's like, oh my god, we're riding dead alien corpses.
And like shit's going down.
Right. So even though it doesn't have, it can't boast the impressiveness of watching like Eureka 7 where they're surfing rainbows, or it doesn't have like Razafan cool, bombastic, alien fight or something like that. It still has the benefit of understanding that with just the right blocking, the right framing, the right edit, the right musical cue, you can still get some kind of impact.
Yeah, and it's not like I was watching Argento Soma for the action. Like, I was watching it more for the characters and the story.
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
I mean, they did an okay. They did a good job of what they had, and I think we should try just wrap this up. So
every single time you see an angry, pissed off shonen protagonist that wants to get revenge, Eren Yeager, for example, and they're really upset and they just want to go fight everything. If anybody has to want to see what that arc is supposed to look like and what the actual outcome of that's supposed to look like, just watch Argento Soma, because you actually see the character develop and get to a conclusive point. Ending thoughts would be
with your mic.
Ending thoughts would be, if you liked Eva and you're over the age of 21, Argento Soma is the next logical step. It is a spiritual canon to it in the sense that it deals with young adults, where Eva deals with teens.
Yeah. Argento Soma is a great show. It's basically, the adult version of Neo Genesis Evangelion. It's mature, it's refined. It's mature. It's got good cinematography, and it deals with a very interesting and cool concept.
Not much for me necessarily. I really enjoy my time watching the show. Like I said, the animation isn't always very stellar, but what it makes up for is great cinematography and direction, and just good ways of framing the characters, and a lot of their struggles. And it practically has one of the best and well-developed twists of almost any mecha show that I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of them, right? Which is why, Frank is basically one of my favorite characters now, just due to that and just the larger context of that show. So definitely go and watch it if you haven't already. It's really good, really well done. It's made by Sunrise too, so fucking those fuckers monopolized every goddamn thing, I swear to God.
Also, you can have the benefit of being like, hey, I like 2001: Space Odyssey. I like the implication of the genesis of mankind into a new state. What if that baby did grow up to be something? Well, you got it for 26 episodes, and you just didn't know it.
Yeah. In regard to my finishing thoughts, what I want to say, one thing that I'd mentioned earlier that I really wanted to is just that I really like the way that you see the muscle fibers on the mechs that Morg uses, because, it builds to what you get later in regard to it being revealed that they're all made of parts of the aliens. Oh, it's Frank. Extra fucked up, but... So you get this nice little combination of the organic and the mechanical, but that aside... What my main thoughts is that this is a really great series, and one of the things that really struck me the most about it is what it has to say about, in regard to its final conclusion, about taking responsibility for your mistakes, about self-reflection, about self-acceptance and progression and creation rather than destruction. Something you see throughout with all of the major characters of the show, humanity in general, Frank, and most importantly, Soma. And this is, I think, an extremely endearing message that will still be relevant for years to come, and I think I'll still be able to relate to some capacity, no matter how many times I watch the show, and I most definitely intend to do so more in future.
Hashtag Barrett and Darling in the Franks, don't at me.
Clearly.
Frank over Franks, there you go.